And that is why rogues should get Warglaives. Alright. Oh, hey! Fight Club, is that you guys? Oh, you guys must be here because of the thumbnail. Maybe go get some popcorn, pull up a seat, let's talk Warglaives Prio. Alright, so jokes aside, this is going to be a look at Warglaives Prio. We're going to be looking at the DPS values, the longevity of the item, guild goals, guild contribution, all the different factors and things and methods that you can look at to determine Warglaives Prio. So, hi guys, if you don't know me, I'm Snow. I run tbcguides.gg and classicworldcraft.com. And I have been raiding at both the casual level up to the hardcore level and been an officer in a lot of loot council and other things since the old MMO days of EverQuest up till now. So I like to think I have a fairly good basis for what I'm saying, and what I'm talking about has been discussed with both Rogue Discord and Fight Club. So I like to think this is kind of a middle of the ground take that makes logical sense, and I hope that by releasing this video that it will combat a lot of the clickbait and such and that gets released around this topic, so that people actually have a logical look at this is what you should be doing with Warglaives. Alright, so let's get into it. So let's talk math, the math behind Warglaives, because I feel before we get into the actual factors, people aren't understanding just how rare Warglaives actually are and the chances of attaining one set. So let's actually look at the numbers so that you can have an accurate view of just how rare this Warglaive set is and what your actual chances are of getting it. So let's have a look at the board here. So at 10 clears, you guys have a 16.1% chance of getting a set of Warglaives. At 20 clears, you guys have a 41.1% chance of getting Warglaives. At 30 clears, you guys have a 61.68% chance of getting Warglaives. At 40 clears, you guys have a 75.95% chance of getting a set of Warglaives. 50 clears, that's 85%. 60 clears, that's 91%. So, what does this mean for you? What do these numbers mean? Well, it means that it's going to take you until phase 4 to 5 before you likely even complete one set of Warglaives. So forget about the phase 3 Warglaives for most people. Unless you get lucky, it's more likely that you're going to see Warglaives in phase 4 or 5 completed. And that's just one set of Warglaives. So we're talking at the numbers again. 50 clears. 50 clears is 85.2% chance. That's basically the end of the game. 50 clears, let's say it takes you a week or two to actually kill Illidan, and then you have him on farm and you clear him every week from then on. That's 1 year. We're talking TBC is basically probably ending at that time. We're talking about a year for phase 3, 4, and 5, depending on how long Blizzard decides to put the phases. So just be aware that if you guys are thinking about, I've seen people talking about dividing up Warglaives, giving like a main hand to one person, off hand to one person, and then just letting the RNG gods determine it. You guys are really tempting fate if you're gonna divide up Warglaives like that, because all it takes is a little bit of bad RNG and suddenly you guys don't even complete one set of Warglaives. We don't know these numbers, these are just best guesses, but the best guess is 5% drop rate with a independent drop rate chance, meaning that all the loot drops and then Warglaives main hand and off hand are their own separate loot tables that can drop together or independently. So those are just the numbers. That's the math. Let's get into what you should actually do for the Warglaives now. Now you're asking, Snow, what about the DPS factor? Who does not DPS with it? What is the DPS gain? Well, before we talk about that, you gotta think about your main thing, which is guild goals. So what are your main guild goals? Is your guild a hardcore guild? Is your guild a casual guild? What type of guild are you? Because let's say you're a hardcore guild, you are a progress, a speed running guild, super hardcore guild. They go to the warrior, because here's just the numbers, is that for single target, rogues do win in the rough DPS gain, and for multi-target, for cleaving and such overall damage, warriors do win. So I have some very rough numbers. I'm hesitant to give you guys exact numbers because the DPS gain is going to vary a lot based on the final proc rate of Warglaives and how your guild does things and the cooldown in between mobs and things like that. But these are some really rough numbers, so I'll give them to you, the DPS differences between the warriors and the rogues. Okay, so for single target, it's in favor of the rogues by anywhere from 25 to 100 DPS. Now, this is such a big factor because, or such a big range, because the DPS value of single target really changes for warriors based on how hardcore they are playing, what other gear they have. Warriors are one of those classes that scales a lot with more gear and better gear. So depending on how sweaty, for example, you set the sims up, and these numbers, by the way, are based on the warrior sims and the rogue sims. I did go into Fight Club myself and discuss with them and talk about these numbers. So these are generally can be agreed upon numbers by people. And the DPS ranges go pretty big just because for some warriors they're not gonna be doing as sweaty things as the sim says, so you gotta untick some boxes in the sim. So depending on how hardcore the rogue and the warrior are, the less hardcore the warrior is, the bigger DPS gap there is on single target. So rogues do win when it comes to single target DPS gain from Warglaives, but anywhere from, let's say, an average of 25 to 50 DPS. And then it can go as much as 100 if the warrior is a real slacker. Honestly speaking, if your warrior is a slacker, probably don't give him Warglaives anyway. So I would assume that if we're in this discussion that both the rogue and the warriors are pretty good, and we're talking about that 25 to 50 DPS range in favor of single target. Now the thing is though, once we get into multi-target, the rogues aren't a hit anymore. Multi-target. So aka this is your full clear, right? So the warriors equal question mark. Now it's question mark because the warriors just win, guys. It's not even gonna, I'm not even gonna go into the numbers because the warriors just win. You don't even need to calculate it. Trust me, the warriors destroy the rogue when it comes to cleave damage, so it's just not even really a close competition. If we're talking about multiple targets, the warriors just they just flat out win. So for single target, rogues are ahead. On multi-target or overall clear, warriors are ahead in the DPS numbers. So again, this all comes down to your guild. If you're a hardcore guild, you probably will value the overall damage a lot more, and I could see this going to warriors a lot, especially since honestly, if you're a hardcore guild, there's probably not even a rogue in your main team anyway. You're probably sending that rogue to raid team 2 or 3 to pick up his Warglaives. So in that case, you probably don't need this video, and I don't know why you're watching, but good job. Click that like button and subscribe, please. Okay, so let's say your guild isn't a hardcore guild, so it's not as cut and dry because in a hardcore guild, it just goes to warriors, period. But you're an average guild or a semi-hardcore guild, where should the Warglaives go to? Well, if you get to this point, then 90% you just base it on contribution to the guild, okay? So if we're weighting these factors going forward, like 90% of all the weighting for this should be going towards contribution to the guild. I don't care whether they're a warrior, I don't care whether they're a rogue. You should be looking at, hey, is this guy, who is the guy who's been with this guild since day one? Who's the guy who's been, I don't know, raid leading, who's been doing recruiting, who's been doing all these other X factors for the guild, the player. You start looking at the player, because I assume that you don't have to look at the logs and who's the better player in this case, because if it was clear cut as far as like who's the better player, obviously you just straight up give it to them. I'm gonna assume for you guys that your warrior and your rogue both great players. So at that point, you're looking at contribution to the guild. If one player has been basically running the guild and making sure recruiting stays busy and making sure everyone even has a raid to go to, I think it's just no-brainer. You give it to them. If not, then it gets more complicated. But in almost every case for Warglaives that I've seen, it's really easily determined once you just factor in contribution to guild, full stop. You don't even have to continue with the rest of this. Now you might be saying, Snow, you're probably saying that because you are officer of your guild and you're getting first Prio on Warglaives. That's not true at all. I raid, or in the past I raided on 2 to 3 rogues. On my rogue that was not an officer, so that would be my white main guild right now, I'm actually second in Prio for Warglaives. As much as I want the glaives, the person ahead of me is literally the raid leader. He preps the PTR stuff, he preps the strategy meetings and the assignments and all that. There's a ton of work, and the guild might not exist if not for him. So in that case, when it came to the Warglaive discussion, I said, yeah, look, I totally get it. I'm not first on Prio there. Then in the other guild, where I was doing a lot of the guild work with prepping the sheets, monitoring loot, and that sort of job, then I said, okay, yeah, I'm first in Prio here because I've been doing all this work. So it comes down to these contributions, and obviously things like roster attendance and such should be a big factor. If you have a flaky guy, don't give them Warglaives, but I don't think you need me to make a video telling you don't give Warglaives to the guy who's a brand new guy to your guild that you don't even trust. I would assume at this stage, if you have a warrior, you have a rogue in the guild, and especially the rogue, since let's be real guys, rogues aren't in the best state, that they are probably pumpers, they're probably tryhards, and they've probably been with the guild for a long time. So yeah, contribution to a guild, probably this is all you have to do as far as 90% of Warglaive Prio discussions go. Alright, so somehow, after you've determined your guild goals and the contribution to the guild and the player, you still can't split between they're both really good players, they're both officers, and they both take turns raid leading or something. I don't know. For some reason, all of that is equal up to this point. What do you look at then? Okay, now we're getting hard, because now is the point where we start factoring all the things that don't really matter that much. We're talking about 10% of the weighting. If you want to use weights for this, 90% of it is determined by contribution to the guild, and then this is the 10%. So these are really minor factors, I know, but at this stage, what else do you have to determine if for some reason the contribution is the same? So I would look at longevity of the item, and this is honestly one where I think rogues have a very tiny edge. It's not much, but I think it is an edge, and I'll explain why. Basically, rogues do not have as good alternatives. That is true. That is something that you will see repeated by a lot of rogues. We do not have quite as good alternatives. But that said, I think this is a very minor factor and shouldn't be a major determining factor, because warriors, it's still BIS. For your warrior, it's still BIS for the rest of the game, and it's still BIS for the rogue for the rest of the game as well. It's BIS for both classes for the rest of the game. The difference is when I was looking at the warrior sims and the rogue sims and looking at the stat differences and the DPS differences, the rogue didn't quite get as many good alternatives going forward as the warrior did going forward. And a lot of people will say that warriors do get comparable-ish. Not really comparable, because glaives are still better, but other alternative things that they can use towards the end of the game, and that is true. And while that is true, I don't necessarily weigh this like as a super big thing either, mainly because it's the end of the game, guys. It's kind of like going to Season of Mastery and telling the people with rank 14 weapons, hey guys, you get to replace your weapons in next Rammus. Good luck. Have fun with that. Right? It's one of those things where once the game's already at that stage and practically beaten, people don't really care about loot that much anymore, unless it's like just on their checklist item. A lot of people just don't care that much beyond beating the game. So there's just something to factor in, that yes, it is true that I do think that rogues get a slight edge in the longevity and the overall usage of the item, because I do think warriors get better alternatives. The alternatives don't really come until towards the end of the game, so I don't think it's fair to just be like, oh well, okay, longevity of item, rogue, win, okay, just give it to the rogue. I don't think that's a fair way to do it. I think you should look at all the factors and factor that in, because this is like a really tiny little thing. Okay, so if you're at longevity of the item and the tiny advantage that rogues do get there isn't enough to decide, maybe you can factor in PvP at this point. But this is one of those things where it's very guild dependent. PvP contribution is not something that every guild determines. Some guilds do not care about PvP performance, and some do. So this is going to come down to your own guild. Although honestly, if you have like a rank 1 level pro level player who's playing in PvP and he's a rogue, I would probably heavily weigh that a lot more than typical. But if you're an average guild with a guy who's maybe low glad, and a warrior doesn't PvP at all, because do warriors? I don't think warriors even use warglaives in PvP. then maybe that factors in a little bit, but it's not, I don't think it should be a overwhelming factor. Again, 90% of the weighting should be contribution to guild, and everything after that, longevity, PvP, we're talking about like 5% values here maybe towards your decision. So that's basically how I would determine Warglaives Prio. Again, 90% contribution to guild. That's the main thing. Guild goals, determine your guild goals, then contribution to guild. That should decide it on 9 out of 10 factors. And then for some reason, if you still can't decide, then only then do you go to longevity of the item, to PvP, to all these other much more minor factors, because there's no real clear-cut winner or big factoring in for those other areas when it comes to Warglaives. Alright, so if you disagree with this video, hit that dislike button. It definitely works. It definitely does a whole lot for the algorithm, and I'll definitely not recommend this video to other people. Take care.